Ant keeping. You most likely know what this hobby is all about. But with more and more newcomers each day, we gotta step back and help the newbies out a bit. And if you're not new to the hobby, this video will serve as a memory refresher. Now you might be asking yourself, what do I need right now to get started? The most basic gear that I would recommend is some test tubes and some cotton. Cotton can be found at your local pharmacy, and test tubes are purchasable off the Ant Keeping Depot and many other ant keeping websites, which are in the description. But how does one go about making a test tube setup? And hang on, what even is a test tube setup? Well, let's talk about that. The main purpose of a test tube is to create a small living environment for your queen and her first 10 to 30 workers. Test tubes have become a vital part of the hobby, and that's why so many people use them. So, let's build a setup. You're going to need a glass of water, a test tube, and some cotton. Now go ahead and fill your test tube about halfway full. Make sure you're not using tap water unless you know it's for sure clean. Now that your test tube is about halfway full, tear the piece of cotton in half, and then whatever side looks a little bigger, use that one and shove it inside the test tube. Now push it down with something long like a pencil or a straw. Then use the other piece as your entrance blocker. Test tubes are great for starting out, but in long term, formicariums definitely work better. If you see mold start to grow in the test tube, definitely try and move your colony out, as the mold can be harmful. Now let's talk about one of the most important things. The ants. How do we catch them? Well, some species are a lot easier than others, and the easy species to keep are usually the ones that are easier to find. But when do they fly? Well, a very useful way to figure this out is by using an online form where users all over the world report back their findings for which months and which species. The link to this will be in the description, and it's on Formiculture. But ants mostly fly between June and August. Now there are a couple ways to catch queen ants, so let's go over them real quick. The first way you can catch a queen ant is by waiting for them to have their nuptial flight, and then going around the nest and looking and trying to find mated queens. Now this method is the easiest and usually happens not even purposefully. Usually when a very established species flies, the queens are just littered all over the ground and it's very easy to collect them. But some species are night flyers. So what do you do if they night fly? Well, that's where method 2 comes in. Blacklighting. Blacklighting uses ultraviolet rays in order to attract insects. This can be incredibly useful to capture queens without putting in too much work, because looking for queens at night without a blacklight is actually pretty hard. Might as well sit back and relax and let the queens come to you. Blacklights can be bought off Amazon for like 30 bucks, but they're not a necessity. So now you know how to make a test tube setup, when queens fly, and how to find them. Now, let's get into raising an ant colony. To start us off with raising a colony, we need to know a few things about housing them. How you house your colony might depend on the species. For example, something like Phaedoli require lots of humidity, but then something like Camponotus doesn't require nearly as much. What they nest in is important too, whether it's acrylic, wide tongue, grout, all of that good stuff. Now most ants can live in either one, they'll just succeed a lot better in one that's meant for them. Camponotus tend to do much better in a nest that's built from wide tongue, because they do not need nearly as much humidity, and because they're big, the little wide tongue bubbles do not bother them. But with the smaller species, you might run into some trouble with the little holes. This isn't required, but heating your colonies is very useful, and can massively help them grow, in which the rate of their larvae, pupae, and eggs develop. Same goes for humidity. Now let's talk about diet. Now the diet between different species is relatively similar. That is, as long as you don't count things like atta or leafcutter ants that are, well, a lot different. A good diet I go by is mealworms and honey. It's a good source of protein and sugar. Keep in mind, if you plan on breeding your own mealworms, you have to remember, what their food eats is what they eat. As a quick side note, make sure that if you have any questions about species you caught, you can DM me on my Instagram, which is also in the description. It is important to do your research, but if you're still unsure about a lot of things and are very new, you can definitely ask around and people will be more than willing to help you out. Now this next step is the hardest. It was hard for me, it was hard for everybody, and it still is hard. And that is leaving your colonies alone. It's hard. We want to check on our queens, we want to check on our new colonies, this, that. It's hard to not check them, but that added level of stress doesn't help your colony. This is a really good exercise for your mental ability because you're able to teach yourself that you don't need this thing in order to get a greater return, which would be a more successful ant colony. Especially for you beginners, it is really hard to leave a queen alone and not watch her. My best advice for you? Binge watch videos. And not just mine, everybody's. Some of my best ant friends out there are linked in the description below. So go give them a watch as well. They're all jam-packed with great information. Alright, but let's get on with this video. Next up, we need to consider tubing. The Ant Keeping Depot offers 3 different sizes, but these can all be purchased from local hardware stores. These are the recommended sizes that all fit into each other and are primarily used by the ant keeping community. So definitely get yourself some as it's quite cheap. But we don't want our ants escaping, so how do we prevent that? Well, it's actually pretty easy, using some simple home products that you probably already have. All you need is some isopropyl alcohol, which is just rubbing alcohol, and some baby powder. You don't need to use very much, but in terms of how much of each, I try to go 1/4 rubbing alcohol and 3/4 baby powder. This gives it a good consistency that isn't too wet. But if you're ready to go big or go home, you can get some PTFE off the Ant Keeping Depot and various other websites. This serves the same purpose, it just lasts a little longer, and you don't have to mix anything together. Well, if you made it this far in the video, then thank you very much. You made it to the end, and now you know how to start ant keeping. I want to thank you guys very much for watching this video, and hopefully you learned something new. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.